Inscryption has me torn. From the game masters, to the exploring elements, to the storyline, and even the gameplay mechanics themselves, it all felt very uneven. While the story segments that existed outside of the Inscryption floppy disk were cool, at other times the game felt disjointed. This title was created by Daniel Mullins, and although I haven't played his other games, I know he's well known for immersive and surreal experiences. This one is the same way, with a near sentient video game that at some points is breaking the fourth wall, at others it's changing the dynamics of the game itself. Many story-driven games don't go too in-depth with the gameplay since they aren't the primary focus of the experience. But this game relies on its gameplay. But first, why doesn't this game feel very mechanically dense? The game is split into multiple sections, with the first being the strongest. The aesthetic is eerie, with a rustic cabin, and cards breathing with life. But this section is short. The more you play, the more limitations you begin to see. There is only one small room to explore, and in that room, there isn't a lot to do. On top of this, the card game section itself, while strong, doesn't add many new layers as you progress. Aside from seeing new card symbols and each boss having their own unique gimmicks, the game is mostly the same. From a story-focused perspective, this wouldn't be too bad, since the purpose is to move on to another section, but the game itself is the narrative. When gameplay aspects suffer here, the story starts to suffer with it. I admit the first section is fine, and for the most part I was loving it. The gameplay was fun, quick to pick up, and offered a healthy amount of challenge. The story primarily focuses on mystery elements, and most of your experience will involve trying to uncover what's really going on. This game, unlike other story games, needs to have solid and effective gameplay throughout, because of how integrated the playing experience is to the story. Despite how harsh I may be describing the game right now, I did enjoy it a lot. The one thing aside from the aesthetic I loved was how it kept trying to make everything fresh. Every boss had its gimmicks, and every section had new ways to experience the game. This game reminds me of two games a lot. Hand of Fate because of how inspired the opening section seems to be by it. Both games share a dealer-type character that serves as a godlike narrator over the world, but that doesn't mean they are implemented or treated the same in both. In Inscryption, Leshy has a lot of human qualities and flaws to him, and he only happens to be empowered because he won the last power struggle. When you take into context that nobody really gets hurt when playing his card game, you start to look at him very differently, especially compared to PO3. The dealer in Hand of Fate, however, has a much more integral role in the narrative, and has much more of a presence. The one aspect this game doesn't utilize enough is how little the characters interact with you in a meaningful way. Leshy at most makes small remarks about the plays you make, or telling one of your talking cards to talk less, but not much else. The other scribes are in a similar boat, which didn't help connect me to the story. In Hand of Fate, the dealer talks to you constantly. He speaks on philosophy, his life, your life, aspects of the game, his ideas. So much of your experience feels like one of those conversations Magneto and Charles from X-Men have while playing chess. By the end, I didn't really get to see much of their personalities, which is a shame. Same with the YouTube character in the real world. He mostly serves his role instead of being a fully fleshed out character. This isn't to say the narrative elements don't work at all. Leshy and the other scribes had fun elements to them and their versions of the game, but for a narrative game like this, I wish there was more done for the characters themselves. It Takes Two compares to this simply by the game's overall format, and the issues that come up because of it. Both games lean on the idea of trying to throw new ideas at the player constantly. All sections have their own gameplay elements, but the price for that kind of system is each section is less dense than they could be. For Inscryption, the second and third sections have these kinds of issues to me. Section 2 is a top-down RPG with combat being very similar to the cabin, but adding in new elements like energy and moxes. When the game dilutes the gameplay into many separate sections, it can make some feel like drags, while some feel great and you wish the whole game was like this. In some ways, PO3's version of the game was better than Leshy's, since his place had a lot more room to walk around in, but it did lack in puzzles and the gameplay a bit. I loved playing most of it, but I can't help but see some of its elements that could have gotten more attention. Maybe if they took out the top-down RPG section, and had every scribe get a dedicated gameplay section as deep as Leshy's, then the game could have been better for me. Or maybe if the game had a larger focus on puzzles, and the different scribes had a bit more personality on display, the experience would have been more consistent to me. A mark of a good story is making sure that the focus elements of your story have enough going on to be present throughout, without getting too old. If a character only has a couple traits, then the more they show up, the less likable they become. Anime has that problem sometimes when a character is the scared one or the angry one, and fails to give them much else to work with. Zenitsu from Demon Slayer can be an example of this type of character, with his only defining character trait being how scared he is most of the time. I definitely want to play through this game again, and I imagine my opinion will soften on it, but for now, What did you think of the game? Did the storytelling and gameplay work for you? What examples of one-note characters in fiction annoy you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already subscribed, it costs nothing, and you can unsubscribe later on if you want. I hope to see you next time.